All right, so we touched a little bit last Monday on the properties of the sand and silt and clay. And, you know, something I'd like to throw up food for thought is the concept of clay, pure clay, and pure sand. Have either one of you ever seen a situation where it has gone fully anaerobic?
Not really.
Right?
I would say that I think the anaerobic, when I've seen it in clay, I've seen it through moldboard plowing and creating a compaction layer and then getting layers of like kind of a compacted zone where you have anaerobic.
A black layer on top, correct?
Exactly, yeah.
So what is that?
You get that foul smell, right?
Right. So what is that black layer? I can answer it for you if you prefer. I mean, it's basically silt and organic fines that have migrated down into the soil profile and can't go any further. Mm-hmm. So in nature, right, like pure clay vein, we use it for pottery, but I've never seen pure clay go anaerobic to a point it smells. And the same is true with sand.
Right, because they're not as prone to having a lot of microbial life.
They're mineral. So we talked a little bit about clay. There's two ways clay form in nature. One is when a glacier runs rock over the top of rock, it creates these clay platelets. So wherever you go to a glacier melting, you'll get tremendous amounts of clay in the water. Sometimes so fine that it's called nano clay because the platelets are just so fine that they stay suspended in the water for a long period of time. This was true, and we talked about this last week as well, but we'll go over it again. And that was when the Egyptian, the prime minister to agriculture was getting complaints from the farmers that the fields were just not as productive as they used to be. So he hired people to go out to the floodplain of the Nile and take soil samples to determine why it is that it wasn't as fertile as it had always been. Lo and behold, they realized that upstream in another country, someone had built a hydroelectric dam. And what happened behind that dam was those nanoparticles were settling out and not continuing down the river. And every spring when they flood, they weren't getting those micronized clay particulates that were the actual fertility of those fields that was replaced every year for thousands of years. So this goes back to understanding that clay is mineral, and the same with sand. Sand can be either quartz or it can be calcitic sand, so basically an old coral reef that got ground up. And so, you know, that's a really wonderful source, long-term source of calcium in your soil, whereas the quartz is not. But again, they're mineral. So what is silt? Well, we know this about silt. Silt's negatively charged. If you pile a bunch of silt up, it will go anaerobic. So what does that tell you that silt is? Common sense would say that's got to be organic matter. Because it can house that high level of bacteria. And like if you've ever walked along a riverbank and your foot sunk into the mud and you pulled it out and it smelled like hell, well, there you go. And I'm not talking like in the river. I'm talking on the bank of the river. So these are the kinds of things that drove me to question soil science as a nature, as dogma, because it's like, well, you don't talk about the fact that sand settles out of the water, out of solution the fastest. You don't talk about sand as a mineral content. You talk about it as a particulate size. You don't talk about clay being magnetic as far as both positive and negative charge, and therefore it settles out the last in the water column, and or silt, which settles out in the middle and holds a negative charge. So these kinds of things are, you know, important to understand if you're a scientist moving forward, trying to understand specific types of nutrition in various types of soils, right? They label the soils based on the particulate that settles out in a sieve, not as a property or a power of those individual particles. And so that's where I came to the conclusion that it has to be organic and not mineral. No soil. And ask any soil scientist; they'll tell you I'm fucking a lunatic for questioning.
But wouldn't you expect a kind of a loamier soil to have a significantly higher amount of organic matter when they calculate organic matter percent?
Well, they calculate organic matter separately from silt.
You know, when you send in a soil sample, is that not just an ash that is created, and from that organic matter is determined?
So there's if you ask for a textual test, they will sieve it out and tell you what percentage of these components are in your soil. As far as organic matter, well, they burn off the sample and weigh it and say, okay, either through an acid or a fire, I don't know, each lab does it differently. Then they'll say, okay, this percentage, because you lost this much weight, this percentage must have been organic matter. And to be honest with you, you know what? Now that I think about it, I don't think anybody kilns stuff anymore. I think they just use it.
And they may not. Yeah. Sorry. I assume that there might be some combustion component to it, where then you would be left with kind of an answer.
So I think this leads for a great experiment as to if we can find pure silt to send it into Logan and just see what happens, see how it comes back.
Yeah.
I mean, all organic matter has mineral in it. We know that. That's why compost has such a wonderful ability to fertilize. Mm-hmm. So there has to be some mineral form, a raw or how do I say this, molecular form in silt. And I'm sure all silts aren't created equally, depending on where you are in the world. And I know, like the dairy farmers up in Vermont along the Connecticut River, I mean, every spring that place, floodplains flood out, and when the water recedes, it leaves an amazing coating of black. It's not, I don't think it's just clay. I think it's more organic matter in that area. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a great question. It's a quagmire. I think that I'd love to see what really would happen if you kilned silt. Would it turn to ash? Mm-hmm. And you know who could do it is a pottery place, someone who fires clay. It wouldn't be too hard for them to throw, on a plate or a steel plate, whatever they do, a handle of pure silt on it, run it into the kiln, cook it, and see what happens.